Welcome to the UCC's second annual Earth Summit. I'm Brooks Barrett, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ, and I'll be sharing the MC responsibilities today with the Reverend Michael Malcolm. Michael, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, Brooks. I'm the Reverend Michael Malcolm, the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. I also represent the Southeast Conference of the United Church of Christ Council for Climate Justice.
Michael, the UCC family is all coming together today. The local, conference, and national settings are each part of making today happen. In spearheading this event, the UCC's Council for Climate Justice was intentional about this. Each year, our summit has a different conference and local church join as co-hosts. The local church selected this year was the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. They have been a leader in exemplifying a commitment to climate justice. And we are delighted to have people joining in person from their sanctuary this afternoon. We will learn more about their church later on through an inspiring video. We are also glad to have the New Hampshire Conference as a sponsor. The conference has been a denominational leader in recent years in bringing to General Synod successful resolutions on both the rights of nature and plastic pollution. The national setting of the UCC is also a co-host, and we will begin with words of welcome from our General Minister and President, the Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson.
Siblings in Christ, I am Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, the General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ. I extend greetings to those of you gathered today in person at the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College, and to those who have joined online from around the country for the second annual Earth Summit of the United Church of Christ. On behalf of the National Ministries of the UCC, I welcome each of you today with the knowledge that you are in the right place for such a time as this. As I reflect upon the vital urgency of the polycrises facing our world, the commitment and action of people of faith will be necessary for change in our world. Much of what we are facing is interconnected. The intertwined crises of climate and inequality is calling us to respond in meaningful ways. My prayer is that this is a time of education and inspiration for you, and that what you learn will be a catalyst for advocacy and action. Our action speaks volumes. It communicates to the world who we are as justice seekers and what we are called to do in loving our neighbors as ourselves. Your presence here today is an answer to God's call to you to make a difference in the church and in our world. May you be strengthened, encouraged, and uplifted for the work that lies ahead as you gather for this summit. May you feel the Spirit stirring and provoking you to be the loving, active, and visible disciples we are called to be as followers of Jesus Christ. Jesus said, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Jesus was talking about the love that results in visible actions on behalf of a world in crisis and those in need. Blessings on your gathering.
We will now hear from the Conference Minister of New Hampshire, the Reverend Gordon Rankin.
Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon. I know that there's some of you out there, and I know there's a whole bunch of you out attending virtually. We are so excited that this day has come. I would like to welcome you on behalf of our New Hampshire Conference Board of Directors, our conference staff, and the 132 local churches that make up the New Hampshire Conference. As the sponsoring conference of the Who Will Listen to the Trees resolution at General Synod in 2021, and a co-sponsoring conference of the Freedom from Plastic Pollution resolution in 2023 at General Synod, we believe the type of conversations that we are having this afternoon are vital faith statements and vital to the ways that we live out our faith. And as a conference where we have put into our regular curriculum at our camp and outdoor ministry center, Horton Center, a curriculum written by a young person from this very congregation, Lydia Hansberry, we believe that talking with all ages about how you take those conversations and move them into action is equally critical. So friends, welcome. May the Spirit be upon us as we have all of our conversations this day.
Thank you, Gordon. The senior pastor of the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College is the Reverend Amanda LePay Freeberg, who will offer our final words of welcome.
Blessings to you all. Thank you for being here in person and those of you who are watching online. There are so many crises that demand our attention, but even if we solve everything else, if we don't address what we've done to our planet and what needs to happen, it won't matter. So thank you for caring about this, raising it up, bringing it forth, voting, talking, making a difference. We are honored to be the host today for the small amount of work that we have done, but we know that there is so much more for all of us to do. Thank you for being present with us. If you need a restroom while you are here in the building, go through this doorway and there's a lift. If you have mobility issues, or stairs, there's a restroom to the left right there, and there is another exit to this street if for any reason this becomes a problematic exit behind you. Bless you. If you are uncomfortable in any way, I'll be sitting kind of in the back, and I'd be happy to help you during this time together. May your work in all the places that you find meaning to make the planet more sustainable and God's earth more lush bring fruition and greatness as we move forward together. Bless you all.
Thank you, Rhea. Our schedule for today is to begin with some important recognitions and awards. We will then hear from our esteemed keynote speaker of the day, Bill McKibben, and engage in Q&A before we take a 15-minute break. After which, we will resume with a video showcasing the climate ministries of the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College, which will be followed by a panel of 3 outstanding organizers for justice who have been in a David and Goliath struggle against Formosa Plastics, one of the largest plastic producers in the world. After Q&A with them, we will wrap up this summit in the best possible way to end an Earth Summit with a call to action.
As we begin with recognitions and awards, I want to start by reminding people of the call to action from last year's summit. Our call to action last year was a campaign to collect thousands of climate hope postcards, which we then delivered in person to the senior leadership of the EPA as part of a larger coalition effort to save thousands of lives, address societal inequities, and get our nation on track for achieving a decarbonized electrical grid by 2035. We never could have made that campaign happen without the churches and the people we are recognizing today. The church is at the heart of any climate justice campaign we undertake are our creation justice churches. These are churches that go through an intentional process of discernment for how to best live out our first calling as Christians, caring for God's creation. All of these congregations brought their own unique gifts to this process. Let me now share with you our newest creation justice churches. Christ Church UCC, Fort Thomas, Kentucky. Christ the Healer UCC, Oregon City, Oregon. Community UCC, Raleigh, North Carolina. Federated UCC, Chagrin Falls, Ohio. First Church of Christ Center Church, Hartford, Connecticut. First United Church of Tampa, Tampa, Florida. Memorial UCC, Fitchburg, Wisconsin. Pilgrim UCC, Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Presbyterian UCC, Saratoga Springs, New York. Southwood UCC, Raytown, Missouri. Spirit of Peace, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. United Church of Gainesville, Gainesville, Florida. Zwingli UCC of Mount Vernon, Verona, Wisconsin. Outside of pictures of my own kids, my favorite photos to receive are those I get from our Creation Justice churches. We'll now take a look at some of those photos. Alongside the churches that fueled our Climate Hope campaign, we had 12 interns and fellows who were busy collecting postcards in communities across the country this past summer. This band of young disciples included Quinn Bush from Riverside, Salem, UCC, Disciples of Christ, Grand Island, New York. Charlotte Crow, Christ the Healer, UCC, Oregon City, Oregon. Jolie Dew with the National Setting of the United Church of Christ. Jesse Doligen with the National Setting of the United Church of Christ. Hannah Eaton from St. Paul UCC, Corpus Christi, Texas. Elliot Gaff, First Congregational Church of Milton, Milton, Massachusetts. Nathan Hinkst, Zion UCC, Tonawanda, New York. Angela Martinez, Outdoor Ministries, Heartland Conference. Madison Owens, Church of the Crossroads, Honolulu, Hawaii. Raylan Smith with the National Setting of the United Church of Christ. Olina Withrow, Parkway UCC, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And Abby Yates with the National Setting of the United Church of Christ. Our young people have a transformative impact on both our congregations and the larger world. All of this is made possible thanks to the generosity of the UCC members who responded to last year's Giving Tuesday appeal from the UCC. This year's donations will go to support this work. As I like to say, it's never too early or too late to donate for Giving Tuesday. Give today and make a plan to organize members of your church to give in November. Michael, I'll turn it back to you for our next exciting announcement.
Brooks, I got to tell you, you own it, doggone it. This next part of our program, y'all, just got me pumped up. What this world desperately needs right now is more prophetic ministry. This is a call to ministry that centers justice. This call is willing to go public, and it's also willing to confront those in power with power. In the UCC, we celebrate those engaged in such ministry with the Dolly Burwell Prophetic Action Award. Now, I love that this award is named after the mother of the environmental justice movement, one of the greatest prophetic leaders our denomination has ever witnessed. We are honored that she recorded a message for us to share with you now.
Blessings, everyone. I'm indeed happy to be able to bring all of you greetings that are attending the second annual UCC Earth Summit. I'm honored, humbled, and so appreciative to have an award named for me, Dolly Burwell. 40 plus years ago, when I and others in my community began to organize to protect our children and our families from toxic waste dumping in Warren County, North Carolina, we had no idea that our actions would be the catalyst for the birth of environmental justice movement. And for that, I give thanks to God. I know that God was at work then, and I see God at work today. I see God at work in those who have been nominated for this award. I see God at work in those who continues to struggle for justice. I know that God will continue to always be with us. So may each and every one of you be encouraged and uplifted in doing what is right and also doing what is so needed today. So I wholeheartedly join you in the celebration of this year's winners. May they inspire you, may they encourage you, and may God continue to bless each and every one of you.
Wow, just wow. And to know that Mama Burwell is in the chat with us as well. We see you and we appreciate you. Now for this year's winner of the Dolly Burwell Prophetic Action Award, when the Climate Hope Cards campaign was launched, we envisioned mostly adults collecting and assigning cards in the pews and during coffee hours. But this year's winner jumped outside the box of what we could have imagined. An entire campground was mobilized with children and adults of all ages taking part. And the effort didn't just stay in the camp. It reached out in the community, to the parents, and to the churches connected to the camp. As a result, no other church or institution collected as many Climate Hope cards as the outdoor ministries of the Heartland Conference of the United Church of Christ for their determination in creating the outward waves of justice needed to build a movement. They are the winners of this year's Dolly Burwell Prophetic Action Award.
That is awesome, Michael. That's truly an inspiring example. We now move to introducing our keynote speaker for today's event. To introduce him, we have none other than the Reverend Jim Antal, the legendary advocate for climate justice, after whom our annual keynote is named.
Go, Rev, we see you.
It's great to be here among you, to see a bunch of faces that I recognize, and especially this face sitting over here, Bill McKibben. I first heard of Bill McKibben when I was preparing my first sermon on climate in early 1989. Bill's article in the New York Review of Books, together with Jim Hansen's 1988 Senate testimony, gave me everything I needed to alert my congregation, which was in Newton Highlands, Massachusetts, to what might be the greatest moral challenge humanity has ever faced. That same year, at the age of 29, Bill wrote the first book for a popular audience on global warming. It was called The End of Nature. Years before that, Bill recognized that he had a vocation as a writer, but the reality of having been born at such a time as this, as the book of Esther says, it would not let go of him. In the summer of 2006, while teaching at Middlebury College, Bill joined some of his students and walked across northern Vermont to draw attention to global warming. Their witness inspired hundreds of people of faith to walk across Massachusetts in March 2007. We called it the Interfaith Walk for Climate Rescue, and the UCC helped sponsor it. A month later, Bill and his students launched the Step It Up campaign, which inspired 1,400 actions across the United States in April and November. In 2008, the organizers took on a new name that would soon come to be known worldwide, 350.org. Thus, the climate movement was born, and Bill McKibben was embracing an expanded vocation as a climate activist and leader of the climate movement. Bill's leadership helped shift the environmental movement from its focus on the demand side of the problem, reuse, reduce, and recycle, to the supply side of the problem. In August 2011, I joined over 1,000 activists when Bill and other leaders led a nonviolent civil disobedience action at the White House, and Bill and I spent 3 days and nights together in jail. A few years later, President Obama canceled the KXL pipeline. In 2012, Bill launched the movement to divest from fossil fuel companies. In July 2013, the UCC National Synod became the first national body and the first religious body in America to vote to divest. In the 11 years since then, endowments worth over $40 trillion have purged their portfolios of their fossil fuel investments. When Bill turned 60 a few years ago, once again, he sensed a call to a new vocation, and he redirected his leadership to launch a new initiative, engaging baby boomers and the silent generation to use their skills, their power, their influence, and their assets to leave a fair and stable planet for our kids, our grandkids, and all future generations. It's called Third Act, and close to 100,000 of us have responded to this call. It's now truly an honor and a blessing to give you Bill McKibben, whose keynote is titled Energy from Heaven or Energy from Hell. Bill McKibben.
Well, brother, thank you so much for that introduction. There is no single person in the country who's more faithfully or more powerfully taken this message and held it up year after year, place after place than Jim Antal. What an extraordinary honor to get to give a lecture in your name, and Reverend Malcolm and Reverend Bert and everybody else. What a pleasure to get to join you. Now, it must be said, because I lived my whole life way out on the end of dirt roads places. I'm a Methodist because that's, who actually goes out there on the, away from the nice tidy town greens and out on the end of the dirt roads. But I grew up in the UCC, and my spiritual formation is entirely dependent on Hancock United Church of Christ in Lexington, Massachusetts, and on Henry Clark and Ed McLean and the other wonderful people who ran that congregation. So if you have trouble with what I'm saying, it's their fault, and take it up with them. That's where I learned how to think about the world. I want to say just a few things today. We've only got a few minutes, and I'm going to speak just on the most powerful and important notes I can hit. And I apologize in advance for the fact that some of them are a little daunting, because we live at a daunting moment. When I wrote that book in 1989, the first book about what we now call climate change, what we back then called the greenhouse effect, I think the year I was thinking about was probably 2023, because last year was the year when it became just absolutely clear how fundamentally human beings were disrupting the processes of this planet. We had the hottest days ever recorded on this earth. Our records with thermometers go back about 250 years, but scientists are good at extending those records with proxies, with glacial cores and lake sediments and things. And so they were very insistent on proclaiming that the hot days last year on this planet were the hottest days we've had on this earth in 125,000 years at a bare minimum. 125,000 years ago, the anthropologists tell us, was when people first started etching symbols on bones and things. So no human society that we would recognize as a society has ever lived on a planet as hot as the one we are living on, and the results are already perilous. I mean, I could list for many hours all the things that happen when you begin to turn up the thermostat on this earth, but we saw them last year. One of the first things that happens is you get, because warm air can hold more water vapor than cold, evaporation and then drought. And when it's hot and dry, things catch on fire. Those of you in this building will remember that we spent a large part of last summer sucking the smoke of those wildfires that decimated the glorious boreal forest of Canada. And once that water is evaporated up in the atmosphere, it's going to come down. It comes down now in deluge and downpour, whose only precedent is, the story of Noah. Vermont and New Hampshire got to feel that sting last summer like never before. We had the biggest rainfalls in our history. And we were reminded what happens when rain falls on places with steep slopes and narrow river valleys. What happens is hideous flooding. In Vermont, our capital city is still a shadow of itself. A quarter mile from where I live, we lost a house, a trailer house that disappeared in a landslide. We couldn't get in and out of town for days because every road was... But Vermont and New Hampshire and the U.S. in general are still rich enough that we can begin at least to talk about recovering from these things. That's not true in the rest of the world. A few weeks after the rain stopped here in New England, in Libya, they had the biggest rainstorm they've ever had. So big that in the course of a few hours, the rushing rivers wiped out a couple of dams and then swept into a coastal city where it swept 10,000 people out to sea. They drowned in the course of an hour. That's the kind of weather that sometimes people describe as biblical. And it is the kind of thing we now see on a regular basis around the world, especially in those places that have done the least to cause the problem. Libya is in Africa, a continent which has produced 3% of all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, but is taking more damage than any place else. This country, with 3% of the world's population, has produced 25% of those gases. No country will ever catch up with us, and it's all still up there. The carbon dioxide that poured out of the tailpipe of my family's maroon Plymouth Fury when I was getting my learner's permit at the age of 15 in suburban Boston is all still up there in the sky, trapping heat. Which makes this not just an extraordinary practical problem, but the greatest justice problem that the world has ever faced, and thus, by extension, the most difficult and thorny theological problem, I think, that we've ever run up against. We've made ourselves, in short order, larger than God. We are able to determine where the seas rise, when the seasons take place, what storms appear on and on and on. And in the process, instead of loving our neighbors, we're drowning our neighbors, we're sickening our neighbors, we're making it impossible for them to grow the food they need to eat, on and on and on. It is a dismal picture, and it is getting worse fast. We've raised the temperature of the planet 1.5 degrees Celsius so far. It's about 2.5, it's almost 3 degrees Fahrenheit. We're on path on our current trajectory in the lifetimes of people in this room to raise it about 3 degrees Celsius. If that happens, the implications are too large to almost bear talking about. Just to give one example of that current trajectory, the UN says it will be sufficient to produce between 1 and 3 billion climate refugees. That's the number of people who will have to up and leave their homes because it will be too dry, too wet, too hot to live there any longer. 1 million refugees on our southern border were enough to completely discombobulate our politics and bring out the ugliest possible side of our national character. Multiply that by 1,000 around the world and try to imagine what development, what war and peace, what the rights of women, what any of the other things we care about look like on a world that disrupted. The single most important task by an order of magnitude for human beings is to figure out how to not stop global warming, too late for that, but to arrest it short of the point where it cuts civilization off at the knees. That is a time-limited task. This is not the poor you will always have with you. This is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change telling us that if we haven't cut emissions in half by 2030, then we cannot meet the targets we set in Paris. And in the process, we will produce poverty on a scale that we can't even begin to imagine. 2030 is, by my watch, 5 years and 7 months away. That doesn't give us much time to work. It would be a difficult task, even if everybody was working in good faith. But as we'll see in a moment, not everybody is. Before we get to that, let me just say that though I've given you bad news, there is good news, and good news aplenty. And it comes, in this case, above all, from the world's scientists and engineers who have worked a real water into wine miracle over the last couple of decades. They have reduced the cost of energy from the sun and the wind 90%, to the point where, as of this moment, we live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is an almost unbelievable gift. It allows us to imagine rapid progress, not perfect free lunch. There is no utopia on these shores anyway. We're going to have to mine lithium and do other things that are disruptive, but the disruptions compared with the ones we're already creating by burning fossil fuel, or compared with the hell that we are building very quickly on this planet, are small, and the promise is enormous. The promise not only that we'll be able to cut short to some degree that rise in temperature, but also the promise that we will no longer need to pour into the air that pollution from the combustion of fossil fuels that kills 9 million people a year. 1 death in 5 on this planet comes from breathing those particulates that lodge in people's lungs. It's by far the largest category of preventable death on planet Earth because we do not need to be burning things anymore. For 700,000 years, people have set things on fire. It served us well. It let us move north and south away from the equator. Nobody was going to live in New Hampshire before you could heat things up, you know. But at this point, it's coming with these extraordinary costs to the climate, to public health, and also to our politics on this planet. Because as long as you depend on a commodity, coal, gas, and oil, that's only available in a few places, the people who control them end up with far too much power, which they then abuse. In our country, the Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons, who took their winnings and used them to degrade our democracy. In Europe, it's Vladimir Putin, who took his and used it to launch a land war in Europe on the 21st century. So the promise of this other possibility is unbelievably attractive. The good Lord was kind enough to hang a large ball of burning gas in the sky, 93 million miles away, but we now know how to make full use of it. We can catch its rays on photovoltaic panels, and we can take advantage of the fact that it differentially heats the earth, creating the wind that turns those turbines. And that provides all the power that we could need. California, for the last 30 days, has been producing more than 100% of the power that it uses from sun and wind and hydro for 6 or 7 hours a day. This is not some impossibility, and it can happen everywhere on Earth. The scientists have done the work to point out exactly how, and how we would make that transition, and how in the process, if this is the thing that you care about, we would save enormous amounts of money. Not only because we wouldn't be doing huge amounts of damage, but simply because it's a lot cheaper to run the world on sun and wind. Because they're free. The sun rises above the horizon every morning, and it delivers that abundance for nothing to all of us, everywhere. There's no Vladimir Putin of the sun and no Koch brothers of the wind. It belongs to all of us by the grace of God, which is great news, except if you're one of those people who happens to own a huge amount of coal or oil or gas that would be worthless in that world. And those people have figured it out, and they are doing their damnedest to make sure that we do not make this transition. If you have any doubts, they're at this point willing to talk about it quite openly. The CEO of Exxon gave an interview to a couple of journalists from Fortune magazine a couple of weeks ago, in which he said that Exxon would not be ever in the renewable energy business because it did not offer above average returns to our shareholders. Because, and here I return again to the idea, because the sun and the wind are free. They are gifts to us. And that is good news unless you prospered by making people pay every month for another installation, another quanta of the energy that you control the reserves of, that you own. So we're at this remarkable moment when, with the wit and intelligence that God gave us, we could make an absolutely epic transformation for our species, and in the process manage to make ourselves a little smaller, to take up a little less space on this earth, to cast a smaller shadow. But we have to do it fast. This is, what do they say on TV? This is a limited time offer, okay? Because once you pass certain points, once we've melted the Arctic, nobody has a plan for how you freeze it back up again, okay? Once you've turned the Amazon into savanna, which is what is happening at the moment in real time, nobody has a plan for how you grow a rainforest there again. Once you raise the surface of the level of the sea to the point where it's inundated our coastal cities, there is no way to drain it back, not in human time. So we have to act fast, and we have to act forthrightly. We have to be willing to take on what I believe in the good book they called The Powers and the Principalities. Is that right, Jim? Is that? And in this case, those are those forces that want to, for their own selfish reasons, delay this transition so that their business model lasts another decade or 2 or 3, even at the cost of breaking this planet. That is in some ways, political task, and there is no way around it. We're not having an argument about the science of climate. That's pretty much over, and it has been for a long time. What we're having is a fight, and a fight is usually about money and power, and so in this case. And that means that we have to use the tools that we have, which is not extraordinary amounts of money, okay? That's the power that the fossil fuel industry has, and they use it very strategically. They purchase congressmen and senators, they have armies of lobbyists, so on and so forth. We won't be able to match that money, but we can build movements. That's the other strategy for change on our planet. And it's a relatively new strategy. The two great inventions of the 20th century were the solar panel and the nonviolent social movement. And the nonviolent social movement came from the margins. It came from Gandhi, and it came from Dr. King, and it came from a million other people whose names we have forgotten if we ever knew them. But it provides a possibility for real change fast. And that means that if you and your congregations can join in this fight, there are things you can do close to home, and those things should be taken seriously, and it's a good idea to worry about the light bulbs in the sanctuary and to talk to the sexton about what the thermostat's set at and to worry about whether or not you're using plastic to, and are there solar panels on the roof and so on and so forth. But that's not, in the end, how we're going to solve this. In a sense, that plays into the great American obsession with the individual in all things. I'm happy that I have solar panels on my roof. I'm happy they connect to an EV. But we're not going to win this fight one Tesla at a time. The most important thing an individual or an individual congregation can do is join together with others in movements big enough and sharp enough to change the basic economic and political ground rules here in time. And that's going to take all the congregations that we can muster, but it's going to take them being willing to work even outside the boundaries of the church in these broader coalitions that make change happen. Those coalitions are here. People are doing good work. Many of the people doing good work are young people. That's who I started 350.org with, 7 college students. That's who ran those divestment campaigns on college campuses, and having gotten that training, went out and formed the Sunrise Movement and brought us the Green New Deal that was the precursor to the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress finally beginning to take some action here on this crisis. So the young people are doing their part. It is not okay to say or think, though it's very tempting, that it's up to the next generation to solve these problems, okay? It's ignoble thing to think, and it's an impractical thing to think because of that question of time. There is not time for the Greta generation to grow up and become senators and CEOs. We've got 5 or 6 years, which means that young people, for all their energy and intelligence and idealism, lack the structural power to by themselves make the change we need on the scale that's required in the time that we have. Looking at the demographics of this congregation and imagining the demographics of UCC congregations across America, let me say, I think all the gray hair is a very good thing. Because if you've reached the age where you have hair coming out your ears. Then you have structural power coming out your ears too. There are 70 million of us over the age of 60 in this country, and we punch above our weight politically because we all vote. There is no known way to stop old people from voting. And because we ended up with most of the assets. Fair or not, we got about 70% of the money in the country. So if you want to lean on Wall Street or on Washington or on your state capital, then it helps to have some people with hairlines like mine. I'm going to end just by, since really I'm here to honor Jim Antal as much as anything else, to return to that that protest against the Keystone Pipeline in the summer of 2011, and Dan and others who are here today were there too. When I wrote the letter asking people to come to Washington to get arrested in what turned out to be the biggest civil disobedience action about anything in a very long time in this country, 1,254 people going to jail, I said, I do not think young people should have to be the cannon fodder here, because if you're 19, it's possible that an arrest record is not the best thing for your resume. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you, And so we didn't ask people as they got arrested, how old are you? But cleverly, I think, we did ask everybody who was president when you were born. The two biggest cohorts were from the FDR and the Truman administrations. It was powerful for the young people who were there to see their elders acting the way we need elders acting in a working society. Not necessarily getting arrested. That's often the last part of this, and most of the work is more mundane. But being outside their comfort zones, because the planet is outside its comfort zone. We need to be doing this above all for the years to come, the short years that we have. And let me just end by saying that the great advantage that people of faith have taking on this fight, that more secular environmentalists don't have, I think, is, how to put it, is the idea that if we do absolutely everything that we can, that there is some force at work in the universe that might meet us halfway. That is the exact opposite of saying God will take care of this problem, we don't need to worry about it. That strikes me as the worst theology that it is possible to imagine. But it does strike me as okay to think, because we all have to think. I mean, my first grandson was born a month ago tomorrow. I know someone now who's going to be alive in the 22nd century, so I'm not allowed the luxury of despair. It's all right to think that if we do everything we can, if we do push this world to transition from energy from hell to energy from heaven, that we have some real possibility of making the most significant change we ever could. No guarantee, I give you no guarantee. We're behind in this fight and the news is not good. Accept the news that there are millions and millions and millions of us, brothers and sisters across this planet, engaged in this fight. And what a pleasure to have everybody spread out across this country in the UCC, taking it on and taking it seriously. Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill McKibben. As we allow for a microphone to be passed to someone in the pews there for our first question, we'll just take this opportunity to thank you and pray that Some ministers in the audience were taking notes and will translate your words into their sermon for tomorrow. That was a powerful message. As I've learned from Jim Antal, to have some authentic hope, we need some authentic truth, and you were able to give us both today. So thank you very much. We'll now look to those who are gathered in Hanover to see if we have a first question for you.
I seem to have answered all the questions in my talk.
I've got a question, Bill. Can you describe how easy it is to join Third Act?
Yes, Third Act is actually very easy, and we don't even check IDs. So if you're, 57 and you want in, what the hell? I mean, you just go to thirdact.org and sign up, and then we will quickly have you engaged, and we'll know where you come from, so we can get you with your local chapter. They're in every state in the country now, and we have also chapters organized by sort of what people have done in their lives. So there's Third Act healthcare workers and educators and things like that. And there is a wonderful Third Act faith group, of which Jim Antal is one of the very wise leaders, and they are doing remarkable work. It's funny, when we started this a couple years ago, people said, oh, this will not work because people become more conservative as they age. That's the sort of, I don't know if that was true once upon a time, may have been, but it's not true, I think, of this generation of older people. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, your first act was in this moment of incredible dynamic cultural, social, political change, where we started taking women seriously in public life, the height of the anti-war movement, the apex of the civil rights movement, and for these circumstances, the first Earth Day in 1970, when 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population of the country, took to the streets, the biggest demonstration in American history, and enough within 18 months to have produced the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And I mean, think about what it was like to live in a time when Congress would actually respond to the demands of people and do it quickly and dramatically. We need that very much again. Earth Day 1970 remains a kind of iconic moment, and it's one that we're going to try to recreate in certain ways in the year ahead. I can't really talk too much about it yet, but stay tuned, because the summer solstice next year, I hope, becomes a kind of you might call it a Sunday, when we manage to get across to the world what this possibility for transformation really looks like and how it can happen fast.
Thank you for that response. Michael, I turn it to you now to tell us if we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, Bill, I have a question here for you from Van Carter. Have we not passed too many tipping points by now to ever return the Earth to where it is even today?
We've crossed a certain number of tipping points, there is no question, and there are things that we are never getting back. And that is just part of, we live in a fallen world. Including in this respect, and that is painful to watch. Some great nature writer, Aldo Leopold maybe, said that the price of loving the natural world around us is to live in a certain amount of pain as we watch it change, and that has been certainly the story of my life. But there are plenty of lines we haven't yet crossed and that we can still stop short of, we hope. It'll just require very fast and thorough action. This is not something that we can take on incrementally. Most of our problems are like that. Most of our political problems are like that. As long as I've been alive, we've been talking about whether or not we should have national health insurance. And we make incremental progress in that direction, and then we slide back a little bit. We'll get there, I think, eventually, because every other industrialized country in the world got there. And when we do, it'll be a good day. And the sooner we get there, the fewer people will have to die or go bankrupt. But it won't make it harder when we finally decide to do the right thing that we delayed. But that's not what happens with climate change, because here the negotiation is not the normal political negotiation between different groups of human beings. That's how politics works and how it needs to work. You're a libertarian and think there shouldn't be a minimum wage. I think that it takes $30 an hour to live, and so that's what the wage should be, and we fight it out in the legislature and hit on $15, and we come back in a couple of years and fight it out again and make progress. That kind of compromise is necessary, and it's what politicians do, and so on. The negotiation that fundamentally underlies climate change is a negotiation between human beings and physics. And that's not a negotiation that we're going to win, because physics does not care. It doesn't care where in the business cycle we are, or how close to the next election, or on and on and on. Physics just does. I mean, we could hope and wish that God had set it up some other way, but that's the way it got set up, you know? So our job is to figure out how to respect that line. And what the scientists tell us is we are up against that line now. So if we, there may come a point at which these conversations are moot, where we've waited too long. And I accept the fact that there might be some point in my life when I just gonna go sit on the porch and drink whiskey, and that'll be that. But we're not there yet, and I hope that we never get there. People my age, probably anybody in this room, is not going to live long enough to see the final outcome of this story. Our job is to do everything that we can to preserve as many options as possible for those who come after us. Because what's happening now is we're getting further down this narrowing funnel where there are fewer and fewer options still available, where the outcome gets more and more determined. And our job is to open that up as much as we can.
Thank you, Bill. Question for you. You've given us an outlook on the state of where we are and that we've got to get to work right away. When it is that we're talking about this to the general public, and especially those climate deniers, how are we supposed to have these conversations, especially given the sense of urgency?
Well, with true climate deniers, the conversation, I think, Reverend Malcolm, is hard. Because we're not talking about people who are sort of waiting for the next issue of Nature or Science to arrive on their doorsteps and see one more study and have the scales fall from their eyes. It's ideologically motivated and very hard to change. Look, we have a major TV network in this country whose entire business model consists of scaring old people about things. And so it's very hard to overcome some of that, you know. But the good news is that we've built a large movement, and that's been very helpful. And Mother Nature is a terrifically good educator. At a certain point, you know, who are you going to believe? Fox News or your own lying eyes? And that's, I think, the biggest reason that we're about, at this country, 70% of people understanding that global warming is a serious problem that the government needs to take on. In our country, 70% is pretty good anymore on just about anything. Our problem, I think, is less convincing the other 30% who are going to be hard to convince. it's activating that 70%, enough of them to really be taking a serious role in making change. Because it's easier for all of us to just wait for someone else to be out in front and doing it. We need a lot of people out in front. But if you're trying to persuade, I mean, one way of saying this is, I will sometimes say in the autumn when I'm talking to young people, don't ruin Thanksgiving, trying to convince your crazy uncle, because it's probably not going to happen. But do talk to your sweet aunt, who's probably worried about what's going to happen to her grandchildren, and, get her a little engaged in this fight. And one of the ways to do that, of course, that's especially available to us is to take it from a faith and religious framework. One of the best environmentalists in the world right now, happily, is the most important figure in Christendom, Pope Francis, whose encyclical Laudato Si in 2015 is the most thoroughgoing critique of modernity that there is, and a very powerful document. And it's powerful in part because he's quite willing to speak in theological language, in the language of faith. We actually don't need a resolution from the UCC explaining anything about the science of climate change. The scientists have already done that. We don't need it endorsed and ratified by the UCC. What we need the UCC doing is talking about what it means to be a follower of Christ and dealing with a warming world. And that's a slightly different task, but a very powerful one. And that's the language that we can bring when we're in our persona as people of faith. We all have different personas in our lives, but for those of us for whom this is an important one, it's important, I think, to speak that language sometimes and to speak it forthrightly. We may or may not be able to defend the world at this point. We're going to give it our best shot. But we should certainly be able to defend the gospel and the plain-spoken and serious language that it provides for us about how we're supposed to behave in this world.
Thank you, Bill. Even though part of me wants to continue this portion of our program indefinitely, we must conclude.
Yes, and I just want to say it's important to get off because the story of this fight about the Formosa Plastics plant is a great reminder of the sort of crucial role that environmental justice and the kind of frontline communities play in this work. And our ability to sort of combine frontline commitment around particular places and projects with a generalized understanding of the fact that we have to take on the entire petrochemical industry in order to defend the overall climate of the planet. That's the synthesis that's actually, if we're going to win, going to allow us to win. So I'm so glad that they're coming to talk now, and so grateful to you all for letting me be part of this today.
Turn on your screen, adjust your volume, and get ready for the second half of the UCC's second annual Earth Summit. As part of this summit, we wanted to lift up a stellar example of what a local church can do to care for God's creation. The Church of Christ at Dartmouth College is the perfect example for us, as you will now see in this video.
Welcome to the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College, UCC, in Hanover, New Hampshire. We are an open and affirming creation justice congregation of the United Church of Christ. and we want you to see what we are doing to confront climate change as a church community.
Our congregation cares very much about how we live in this beautiful planet Earth for centuries, millennium to come. And so it is an incredible privilege at this point in time to think about how we might begin to model a new way of being and a new way of living on God's great earth together with all of creation.
One of the first things we did was to, follow the guidelines that the UCC was providing to become a climate justice church. That was by far our first goal.
And the first thing that we convinced ourselves that we needed to do was actually use less electrical energy. And so we did a lighting project, which helped to reduce the electrical energy in the church by quite a bit. And these are the lights that we did, these nice big flat panel LEDs, and a new dishwasher that's pretty energy efficient. So we got rid of a big propane gas range, and we installed 2 high-efficiency electric induction ranges with cooktops and what have you. And then we decided to layer on the solar on top of that.
We have been influenced by the wonderful Holy Heat Pumps video put together by the National Church, and are moving really with a lot of deliberation and purpose toward becoming the greenest possible church that we can. And that includes using heat pumps for all of our heat and getting rid of fossil fuels.
We started looking into many options for greening our building and making our carbon footprint less. We have a lot of people at the church that have been talking about putting solar panels on the roof. And so we made that happen.
It saves us about 50% of what our electric bill would be if we did not have the solar system.
So there is a point at which this pays for itself, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So I would like to continue my introduction and my welcome to Tivi Pare, the New Hampshire Conference's Director of Outdoor Ministries and Director of Horton Center.
It is in our mission at Horton Center to be a steward of all God's creation, and it's something that happens super easily at camp because when you are away in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, you are immersed in God's creation, you have a love for it, you have a care for it. So when kids go back out from the mountain, is a song we sing, they go out from the mountain and they turn the world around, they take the messages that they learned at camp, they bring it back to their communities and they live out that message, and it takes the faith and the hope that they learned and acquired at camp. They take it off the mountain, they spread it around, and that's what's going to change the world.
I like being in a climate justice church because it helps the planet and helps less fortunate people.
One of the things that excites us about being a creation justice church is how many members of the congregation of all ages really are owning that and have it in their regular consciousness. What can we do next? How can we live into being a creation justice church?
Day by day, month by month, we will make this earth more fun. Every tree and every rock, gonna spread conservation tall.
Bob Lormar from the national setting of the UCC shot this video last fall. Thank you, Bob, for that terrific video. And thank you to the Church of Christ at Dartmouth College for being such an outstanding example of what is possible.
Your church is indeed an inspiration. We now transition to our all-star lineup of panelists. As someone who works at the grassroots, I love our grassroots organizers. They have some stories that are not always heard, but definitely need to be heard. Their stories show us what's possible when people take action. They are an inspiration for each of us to take action in our own lives. Brooks, tell us who we have with us today.
Thanks, Michael. I'm excited as well by our guests. Let me introduce them in the order in which they'll be speaking. First, we'll hear from Diane Wilson, a winner of the Goldman Prize, who for the last 30 years has led campaigns, done hunger strikes, sunk boats, and even climbed chemical towers in her fight to protect her Gulf Coast bay. In December 2019, Diane won a landmark case against Formosa Plastics for the illegal dumping of toxic plastic waste in the Gulf Coast. The $50 million settlement was the largest settlement of its kind since the establishment of the U.S. Clean Water Act. Next, we will hear from Nancy Bui, who is the founder and vice president of External Affairs for Justice for Formosa Victims, as well as the co-founder of the International Monitor Formosa Plastics Alliance. In 2016, the Formosa Han 10 steel plant in central Vietnam released toxic chemicals into the sea, leading to extensive marine life casualties along Vietnam's coastline and severely impacting the livelihoods of over 100,000 fishers and causing devastation to over 4 million coastal residents. Nancy has been a leading advocate in calling for accountability and justice for those impacted. Finally, we will hear from Sharon Lavigne, who is the leader of Rise St. James, a faith-based grassroots organization working to defeat the proliferation of petrochemical industries in St. James Parish, Louisiana. Rise St. James galvanized community opposition and successfully defeated the construction of a $1.25 billion plastics manufacturing plant in 2018. The group is currently fighting to prevent Formosa Plastics from building a massive multi-billion-dollar plastics plant in the parish. Sharon is the winner of the 2021 Goldman Environmental Prize. Diane, if you could get us started, that would be terrific.
Well, thank you very much. I think there's a series of photographs that we're going to show because if there's anything about Formosa Plastics, it is about their plastic that they have been illegally discharging for 27 years. Is the screen up? I don't see it yet. I don't know. Well, I guess basically until we can see some of the photographs, because people don't get a sense of the volume and the extent of plastic contamination from a plastic plant. And this is what I have been pursuing Formosa for actually 35 years. I'm a fourth generation fisherwoman, and I have been around boats my whole life, and I was 40 years old. Oh, here we are. I was 40 years old when I first started fighting Formosa. And as Bill McKibben stated, is like, don't underestimate us folks out there with the gray hair, because I am now 75 and the campaign still is ongoing. And what you will see in this picture is the microplastic, or some people heard it called nurdles. These are pellets. They're polypropylene, polyethylene. The powder is PVC powder, SPVC, meaning specialized polyvinyl chloride. And this is the vinyl chloride that you hear about, that is even now before the EPA to have it regulated much more severely and hopefully banned one day. But this is from the plastic that is like Formosa Plastics. It's 2,500 acres. It's got 3,000 workers, and they have 20 units, and they make 1 trillion pellets a day. So what you see above you, the top two photographs, are what the pellets look like in the water. And also below is you will see what the powder looks like, and it's on the water. Next photograph. So this is Formosa Plastics. And as I've told you, it's 2,500 acres, 20 units, 3,000 workers. The community has been devastated. It used to be 1,500 people that lived there. Half of them filed suit and left. Formosa now owns the elementary school that used to house the students. There is no elementary school anymore. So it's predominantly Formosa Plastic. They owned most of the houses. They are the largest landowner in Jackson County, as you see in that far right. And this is always a reminder why Sharon and her community does not want Formosa there. This is that photograph you see. It looks like a plant exploding or a nuclear blast. That is the flare going off. And it's very, very regularly that it does that. Next, please. And these are the fishermen, because it's when these plastic plants, they have to have access to water. One, they need water. Two, they have to have a place where they're discharging their toxic waste. And Formosa has 9 million toxic gallons per day that is going into Matagorda Bay. And here you see we have shrimpers, we have a sportsman, we have oystermen, we have Vietnamese crabbers, we have a very large Hispanic oyster fleet that is plying out there, and they have to be in the same place where these toxic discharges are. Next, please. And these were the locations when we started realizing that there was a real problem with Formosa's discharges. Not surprising, from when we first started talking to Formosa, they absolutely denied there was any problem at all. And they said they didn't discharge any plastic into the bay. And this is Matagorda Bay. And as you see in the kind of up there on the right a little bit, that's Point Comfort and Formosa Plastics. And there was a 20-mile area, and me and a few workers, they were injured workers from the plant. They were whistleblowers, and we started collecting samples of Formosa's discharge. We did this for 2.5 years. We went out every day, rain or shine. We waded in the water. We went down to boat launches, and I started taking a kayak and went into every single one of Formosa's stormwater outfalls. Next. And this is where Formosa has their discharges. It's Matagorda Bay, which at one time historically, more shrimp were exported from this community, this bay, than anywhere in the United States. And now there are no fish houses. In my community, there used to be 120 boats. There are now maybe 5 boats. There used to be 5 shrimp houses. They have all been bulldozed. And what you see on the far right is the back end of Formosa, and they had 10 stormwater outfalls. And this is supposedly where the rainwater that is coming off of a chemical plant and is supposedly rainwater. And what we found instead was 27 years of disposing of plastic and pellets that had been dispersed all over the facility, out in the fields, out in the ditches. And we have just now spent over 1.5 years trying to clean up the plastic out of this Cox's Creek, which is here on the right. And they had to use excavators, and in some places, they had to dig down 3 feet to remove all the plastic. Next. And this is the people that helped me. Almost everyone in the community was very afraid to speak out. It's what Bill McKibben was talking about. When these large communities, they do not want to lose the power because they are making, like Formosa is making $1 billion in this community a year. And so everybody is afraid to speak out, and there is a lot of retaliation. And so I, believe it or not, I was getting the workers from the plant. I was getting shift supervisors. I was getting workers that worked in utilities, and they came to me, supposedly the last person a worker would want to talk to, because they couldn't go to the company. They couldn't go to elected officials. They couldn't go to state and federal agencies. So those workers started coming to me, and their reputations were ruined. They were called losers. People told them they should have kept their mouths shut. But it was because of those handful of workers that came forward that I knew the true scope of what was going on inside that plant. And I have to say, I believe that Formosa is a really bad actor, but I think a lot of these corporations are very similar, and the bottom line is profit, and the environmental destruction and the destruction that happens with the workers and the community is not even told. That story is not even told. And I am glad I'm here now and can talk about that. Next. That's the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane, for that presentation. We deeply appreciate it. We turn now to Nancy.
Yes, it's me, Nancy Bui. Thank you for having me, and hello, everyone. The story from Diane, very, very touching, and everyone can understand a company that the company who just want the profit and not care for the environment nor the people. In my story, Formosa Plastics even gone further. They collaborate with a dictator government, not just punish the victim. They also done so many things that we cannot imagine. So I was a journalist in South Vietnam before 1975, born, living, and surviving through the Vietnam War. Following the war, I escaped Vietnam by boat with my 2 young children, spending 22 harrowing days adrift at sea. After enduring 8 months in a refugee camp in Thailand, we were resettled in the U.S. in 1979. In the process of rebuilding our life, I returned to school and took on a part-time job to support my family. Amidst the challenges of starving anew, I admit I pay little attention to issues beyond our immediate need, including environmental concern. However, everything changed in 2016 when the environmental disaster caused by Formosa Plastics unfolded in Vietnam. Formosa Plastics USA, the largest investor of the Formosa Hà Tĩnh steel factory in Vietnam, discharged over 100 metric tons of toxic chemical waste, including cyanide, chlorine, mercury, and other heavy metal into the ocean. This ecological disaster resulted in the death of countless fish, contaminating over 200 kilometers of coastline, leaving 179 people out of jobs and affecting over 4 million residents in 4 provinces, including Hà Tĩnh, Quang Binh, Quảng Trị, Thừa Thiên. According to Vietnam's government, it is the most significant environmental disaster in Vietnam history. One diver died and hundreds of people were hospitalized for food poisoning. A vast area of ocean and land got severely contaminated. The government prohibited fishermen from going fishing for 2 years because the marine life was contaminated. The chemical disaster was followed by the irresponsibility and greed of Formosa and the Vietnamese government, who initially denied and covered up the situation. Under pressure from the public, both in and outside of Vietnam, an environmental study was conducted by over 100 local and international scientists, which showed that Formosa was at fault. However, this study was never released to the public as the Vietnamese government cited it as a national security matter. Formosa offered to pay $500 million without any study for the real damage. Unfortunately, they paid to the government, not to the victim. Soon thousands of victims received little to no compensation for what they have lost. When they attempt to file a lawsuit in local courts, they and the advocates who raised their voice to protect the victim were stopped, beaten, arrested, and imprisoned with heavy sentence up to 20 years. 8 years have passed and 23 of them are still in prison as we speak. Since the victim cannot find justice in Vietnam, they have called out for help. It takes a church to deal with this situation. Catholic Bishop Nguyễn Thái Hợp, who was in charge of the region at the time, went to Europe and US to seek assistance. We met with him and formed Justice for Formosa Victims in 2017. After over 2 years, with the help of lawyers and NGOs in Taiwan, the US, and many other countries around the world, we have 7,874 victims filed a lawsuit in Taiwan in June 2019. You can imagine the task of coordinating this lawsuit, which involved 7,874 plaintiffs and span 4 legal systems: Vietnam, Taiwan, the US, and international environmental laws. Many nights I did not sleep as Vietnam and Taiwan are on the opposite side of the globe. Collaborating with lawyers and victims during their daytime means working through my nighttime. I also face a lot of pressure from the cyber attack, regularly being called all sorts of names like cheater, scammer, and even prostitute. But I kept going because I knew that without our help, these unfortunate victims could never find justice. The lawsuit in Taiwan had entered in its 5th year, having encountered denial from both the district and high court. However, a fortunate development occurred when the Supreme Court granted jurisdiction to the victim in late 2020. Despite this positive step, nearly 4 years later, the victims are still entangled in the complexity of the court procedure. Formosa had thrown a new obstacle into the mix by requesting that the court mandate the authentication of the victim. Power of attorney, first by the Vietnamese government and then by the Office of Taiwan Economic and Culture in Hanoi. This demand presents a difficult challenge, given the Vietnamese government complete control and its obstructionist stand toward the victim quest for justice. Through the advocacy of lawyers and other environmental and human rights activists in Taiwan and the U.S. and the intervention of 7 bipartisan Congress members later, the Taiwan Minister of Foreign Affairs lowered the requirement, now require the victim go through the Taiwan Office of Economic and Cultural Office. However, this assistance is not sufficient. Victims who went to this office were stopped and threatened, and their helper was summoned to the post police office for investigation and threatened with arrest and imprisonment if they continue to assist. Recently, the local police of Quang Binh went even further, using 3 trucks to surround the village for 3 nights, broadcasting announcements prohibiting anyone from going to Hanoi to complete their paperwork, labeling our effort as a scam. The victims are now in shock, fear, and discouraged. When the press questioned the Vietnamese government about a lawsuit in Taiwan, the response was misleading, claiming that the matter had been resolved. All victims had been satisfactorily compensated. The marine line had returned, the polluted area had been restored, and the fishing industry revitalized. They further assert that those arrested and imprisoned were solely individuals who had violated the law. In the midst of this turmoil, many victims found themselves without employment, prompting desperate measures such as coming to the southern provinces in search of odd job, or offering their property as a collateral to afford a broker fee for work opportunity in South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, or China, or even Europe. This often means leaving the children behind to be cared for by grandparents or relatives. The heart-wrenching consequences are evident in the children longing for their absent parents. Each conversation with them revealed tears. They ask me when their parents will come home. They miss them so much. I have no answer for them. The absence of parental care weighs heavily on these young souls. Tragically, the prolonged separation takes a toll on families. Often resulting in unavoidable fractures. Contract for labor abroad typically span at least 3 years, worsening the strain on these families. Regrettably, some victims never return home, risking themselves to the peril of dangerous journey, exemplified by the tragic incident that shook the world in 2019, when 39 Vietnamese immigrant workers died in a frozen container at the border of England, 35 of whom came from regions affected by the Formosa disaster. Dealing with the same company, Formosa Plastics, Diane Wilson of San Antonio, Waterkeeper Sharon Lavigne of Rai St. James, and as Justice for Formosa Victims, we formed Justice International Minority Formosa Alliance, along with our partner organizations such as Friends of the Earth, Break Free from Plastic, Earthright, the Center for International Environmental Law, Earthwork, and numerous other worldwide actively engaged in advocating for environmental and human rights for these victims. Together, we advocate before the U.S. Congress, Senate, and State Department, urging diplomatic intervention to compel both Taiwanese and Vietnamese government to uphold their obligation to the victim in accordance with domestic law and international law and human rights standards. This concerted effort aimed to facilitate justice for the victim and hold Formosa Plastics accountable for its action. Whether a U.S. corporation like Formosa USA damage the environment domestically or abroad, they should be held accountable the same. We are circulating a sign-on letter addressed to the Vietnamese government from the U.S. Congress, sponsored by Representative Joe Larkin, and we urge organization and member of UCC Church to endorse it and exert pressure on the Vietnamese government to fulfill its obligation, compensated adequately to the victim, clean up the polluted ocean and land, and release all the prisoners of conscience. I would like to share the link on the screen if I can, and kindly request your support to help these injustice victims fight justice. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nancy. We have shared the link in the chat, and we will make sure it's distributed to everyone in the post-event email. We really appreciate your presentation, and we now turn to Sharon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. Back in 2018, while I was in my classroom teaching, my daughter called me and told me that our governor, John Bell Edward, at that time had approved a 9.4 Formosa Plastics industry to be built in St. James. Now, mind you, we have 12 industries and refineries within a 10-mile radius. We have over 100 storage tanks within a 10-mile radius. The only storage tanks that's in St. James is in my district, and I live in the 5th district of the parish. Our parish has 7 districts. They only put these plants in the 4th and 5th district, where predominantly Black residents live. When I received the news about Formosa would be coming in, I was in an organization called HELP. We asked them to let's stop Formosa from coming in. They said we couldn't stop it because the governor approved it. They said we couldn't stop it because it's a done deal. They said we couldn't stop it because our parish council members would approve it. I didn't believe them at first. Then I saw for myself. After the Help Association wouldn't try to fight this industry, I prayed. I talked to God. I didn't even know Diane. I didn't even know Nancy. I didn't know anyone that was dealing with these things back in 2018. And then in October of 2018, that's when we formed Rise St. James. Rise St. James is a faith-based grassroots organization because it came from God. God gave it to us, and He put the fight in us that you could never imagine. I remember having a town hall meeting at St. Michael's Church, and we asked Diane to come and speak, and she did a marvelous job. She explained to the parish how, if this plant would come in, how devastating it would be for our community. We also had Diane to speak at the parish council meeting in front of our public officials. They didn't even budge like it was nothing because they had already approved their air permit and the wetlands permit. So we had a fight on our hands because they didn't listen to anyone. So in 2019, January, they approved this plant to come in. In 2019, in May, we had our first march from Reserve to the governor's mansion. He wouldn't come out to speak with us at all. Then we had another march in October of 2019, asking the governor to come out. We had people from New Orleans, from different parts of our area, different parts of Cancer Alley. They call our area Cancer Alley. because of the high levels of cancer that we experience in our communities. So we had a fight, and we're still fighting. We went to court, and we sued Formosa Plastics and Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. The judge ruled in our favor that Formosa Plastic would vacate the premises, but they haven't started to build yet, but they have the land and everything. So the judge ruled on all 10 counts in our favor. They appealed it. We went back to court on November 7th of last year with a 3-panel judge. They still would not let this go. So we went to court again in December. We had people from different states came by to support us. A 5-panel judge, 1 judge was in our favor, the other 4 was against us. So we still have a fight on our hands. So now we're taking it to Louisiana Supreme Court. We haven't gotten a date yet. We haven't heard from them yet. We're waiting to hear something. So if Formosa Plastic would come, which I know they're not coming, but if they would come, they would emit ethylene oxide. That's a cancer-causing chemical. They would emit, they would drop benzene in our water, which we already have it in there already. And we already have butadiene in the air. They would increase the toxicity of our area by, I think, 800% more. And it would be a death sentence for St. James, especially the 5th district where I live. And we're still fighting. And Army Corps of Engineers haven't decided if they're going to give them a wetlands permit. They're still hanging on, waiting to see what they are going to do. We went to the White House on 2022. We had a march with people all over the Gulf Coast. We had like a funeral service to get the attention of the President of the United States, asking him to stop Formosa Plastics from coming into St. James, to stop all the pollution down Cancer Alley. We changed the name from Cancer Alley to Death Alley because it's a death sentence. If you come from out of state and live in St. James or live in Cancer Alley, you're probably more susceptible to die faster than us because we've been here all of our lives, not knowing we were being polluted, not knowing we were breathing this poison. So people have come to visit us to see how what we're going through. So many people have come here to have tours, and some of them leave with a stomach ache. Some of them leave with a headache. We always having headaches and sinus and throat. We have all kinds of problems. We have so many people who have died from cancer. So many people that worked in industry, their lives were cut short. So many people had come to rise to let us know what's going on in industry, because they letting us know that they are not being protected as workers that works in the plants. And especially there was a Formosa plant in Baton Rouge. It's a small one. We didn't know they had one until we did our march. When we marched in 2019, we found out that there was a Formosa Plastics in Baton Rouge. Some people that work there said that they're not protected. They don't have the right suits to wear to protect themselves. They just go in and work, but they do have signs saying don't go beyond this area because it's cancer causing. So much of it is cancer causing. And so we are trying to get the ministers on board to help us with this fight. That's kind of hard because they said they don't want to bring politics into the church. But I told them this is not about politics. It's about saving our lives. If we don't stop all of these industries from coming in here, you won't have politics or anything else. You won't even have human beings because these plants are taking over our lives. When I asked to speak with the HR person at Formosa, they would not give me a meeting with her. They would not meet with Rise St. James, the same way our governor would not meet with Rise St. James. Now we have a new governor in Louisiana, and we haven't had a chance to ask for a meeting with him, but we plan to ask him to meet with him and to let him know how we stand on all of these polluters that's coming into our community. We ran Wan Chemical in 2019. They packed up and leave because they didn't want the fight, plus with issues with the land. We ran South Louisiana Methanol last year. They packed up and left. Now there's another industry that's trying to come in. It's called DG Fuse. They say that they are a clean energy. No, it's not clean. If you have to get an air permit to come in here, it's not clean. So our fight continues. Formosa haven't stopped, and we are not going to stop either, because we say it no more, not in St. James, and not 2 miles from where I live. I don't think so. We already have a lot of illnesses that's going on in our communities, a lot of deaths, a lot of funerals. So we said no more. But we haven't heard anything from Formosa, but we know they will not be built in St. James. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for that powerful presentation. Michael, let's take our first question from those online, and then we'll take our second question from those gathered in Hanover.
Yeah, Brooks, and I guess this is for Diane and Sharon in particular. One of the questions that's come up in the question and answers is basically, what can we do to get involved in helping in this fight?
Well, I can speak for myself. I think just getting the word out about Formosa Plastics, and that it is as the federal judge said, they are a serial polluter. Their pollution, their violations are enormous, and that when they build, they will take over the communities. So communities like Sharon, I went over there and saw where it was located. You cannot imagine how the traffic, there is accidents every week and deaths, and they even brought the police for the traffic because it was so immense. And like I said, they have bought up all the land. They have got 2 downstream plants that takes their plastic, and they got 40,000 acres. So when they say they want to come in, trust me, they want to come in and take over the community. And Sharon and that community and those school children, the legacy will be gone because it will now become Formosa. So people and organizations, they need to lend support to what Sharon is fighting in Louisiana. They need to lend support to Nancy, because this is Formosa. It's a family dynasty, and it is Taiwan that is making the decisions. And wherever they go, they create this destruction and this havoc, and they are intimidating and scaring people. So in any way that they can offer support, getting the message out and talking to, and if anybody lives near the coast, I would recommend them going out and just start checking the plastic that is out there on the beach. These nurdles that they talk about, the powder, it's all over the bay. It's the fish have it in their guts. The oysters, the oystermen, they open it up. The microplastics is in the oysters, and it can devastate our communities.
Well, to help us get the word out, you can go to our website at risestjames.org. You can sign the petition. The QR code is in our website, asking President Biden to stop Formosa Plastics. We have 96,000 signatures already. We want as many signatures as we can get to bring to President Biden. He can stop it like that.
Thank you for those responses. We'll now turn towards our audience in Hanover for a question from the audience there.
Hi, great presentation. I really appreciate hearing from everybody. Just curious, how do you pay for the legal fights?
Well, I can tell you how we did our clean water suit. It was a citizen clean water suit because the federal agency nor the state agency had ever filed a single violation, and Formosa had never turned in a violation. So there is a provision in the Clean Water Act that if there is no evidence that a citizen can file it. And so we filed a citizen suit. And interesting enough, I used a legal aid, like most people see it as you're trying to get a divorce, you're trying to get some kind of complaint addressed with your landowner or your car or whatever. We got legal aid in Texas, and it's for people who have no money, and our organization was a small grassroots with mainly fishermen involved. And so the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid filed our lawsuit. It did not cost us a single penny. And they fought Formosa Plastics with all their lawyers, probably $900 an hour lawyers, and we won. So it shows you, if you have the right heart, and there are ways to get this done.
Well, we used Tulane Law Clinic. The students at Tulane fought for us with the guidance of their instructor. And we also had CCR from New York. We had CBD from New York. And we had Earth Justice. So we had 4 law firms, but the main ones was the students from Tulane. So we didn't have to pay anything. Thank God for that.
Yeah, I see some people asking about Formosa from Taiwan. The structure of Formosa Plastic Group is very complicated. They have their mother company in Taiwan, but wherever they go, they form a local company. Just like they come to the US, they have Formosa Plastic USA, or they came to Vietnam, they have Formosa Steel Harting factory, so far and so on. So, but they came, like Diane said, they came from from one Formosa Plastic Group, and they make a decision over there. Just like in Vietnam, Formosa Plastic Group in Taiwan decide how much, what kind of technical they use, how they manage it, how they marketing it. Everything that over $100,000 will be decided from the Formosa Plastic Group, but they also have local Formosa company there, so we can sue the case of Diane and Sharon. They sue Formosa USA. In Vietnam, we sue Formosa USA because USA invests lots of money in that steel factory in Vietnam, and also we sued the local company, Formosa Formosa Steel Factory in Ha Tinh, to answer the question, I hope.
Thank you, Nancy, for that response. We have some questions where people are trying to get a better grasp of what exactly are the kinds of plastic products that Formosa is producing. Is it going straight to consumers, or are there companies that can be put pressure on that are buying products from Formosa? If you could help shed some light on that, that'd be terrific.
Well, I know. Yeah, won't you go ahead? You start, Nancy. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes. In 2023, Formosa Steel Factory in Vietnam export to the U.S. over $400 million of their products. So we are searching for who buying those, and then we need to talk to them because, you know, these product made by the tier and, you know, so much grief from the community, they shouldn't buy from it. But we have not successfully tried that yet. So maybe from this webinar, we hope anybody know about it. We would like to hear from it. Yes. Diane.
I do know one thing that's real interesting that most people won't even think about, you know, because Formosa Plastics makes plastic polyethylene, polypropylene. They have, and they do PVC, like PVC pipes, like Wharton, Texas. They ship, they got railroads and they ship it by train and they ship it by these big semi trucks. And I know that, and so that's PVC pipes. But the interesting thing that people should realize, Formosa makes a fiber, a plastic fiber. And I once was on a big conference, and the clothing and fiber industry were trying to become more sustainable and more greener. And I was like, why do you want a plastic advocate here? And they were saying, because they buy most of their material from Formosa fiber. It was like 50 some odd %. So your clothing, that is an extremely good place to start targeting, is the clothing, because it's plastic. So to me, that's a good place to start. And everybody buys clothes. And I just don't think most people realize it, how much is plastic.
Yes, that's true, Diane and Nancy. We have so many things that the plastic is used for. Well, we could start off with something simple, like the throwaway bags at the grocery stores. When you go to the restaurant, the straws that you drink out of, you don't have to use a straw. Stop using those simple things that we use just to start us to gradually move away from all this plastics. If we stop buying the things that they make the plastic with, we can shut them down. I know it's not going to take right now, but it's going to take a while, but we can get started. Find out what we shouldn't, like some places, some stores have the paper bags instead of the plastic bags, or bring your own bag to the store. But we have to start off somewhere by stop using all of this plastic. And that's one way to get them, to shut them down.
Thank you for all of this information and this wealth of wisdom that each of you has shared with us. I think we will, gather up some of the resources that have been mentioned. We know there's also a Plastic Jesus resource for churches that want to dive into learning more about plastics. And they also lift up Rise St. James in that resource. And so we'll have links to that too, for all the ways that congregations can get involved. Michael, what are your thoughts here?
We want to say thank you so much to each of you for your wisdom that comes from the experience. And thank you for making a difference. Each of you are truly an inspiration to us. Brooks, how do you feel like wrapping up this incredible summit?
Michael, I think there is only one way to wrap this up. That is with a call to action. Thankfully, we have more than abstract exhortations today. We've got a real campaign, and we've got the lead organizer for that campaign, Sue Miller. Sue, we've got all this positive energy to do something now after hearing from these incredible speakers. Can you tell us where we can channel this energy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brooks. Hello, everyone. Today, I am thrilled to discuss the Vote for Climate Hope campaign, which is a United Church of Christ initiative that tackles the overlapping crisis of climate and inequality. Building upon the success of our 2023 Climate Hope Cards campaign, this campaign leads into our strengths as a denomination. First, through our churches, we have deep local roots in communities throughout the country, urban, suburban, and rural, and in blue, red, and purple states. Second, we know that social change relies on broad participation in movements through member-driven organizations, and we are not only member-driven, but we are also spirit-led. We see this whether we are gathering to discern at General Synods or at our climate action assemblies every 2 months. General Synod resolutions have focused us on climate action at the federal level and the intersectionality of all justice issues. Our local church leaders from last year's Climate Hope campaign have also identified priorities for 2024. Electing climate justice champions to Congress, and advocating for legislation addressing environmental racism and frontline community harms. In line with these priorities, we are now in the first phase of the Vote for Climate Hope campaign, which is an art contest for children and youth. Each of you is invited to the award ceremony for finalists on Saturday, May 4th. The winning art will then be placed on Vote for Climate Hope pledge cards that will be sent out to congregations throughout the country. In the church and in the community, members will be encouraging people to vote and to vote their values. Part of the beauty of voter pledge cards is that they give an opportunity for members throughout the country to have a face-to-face interaction that bring people into a growing movement. Help us continue to grow. Together, we can have the power to make a difference in creating a more just and sustainable world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sue. What a great way to end this summit. We will have a post-summit email with information and links about the Vote for Climate Hope campaign and the resources that have been referenced in the summit today. Finally, a big thank you to everyone who made this summit possible. Thank you, Council for Climate Justice. Thank you, New Hampshire Conference. Thank you for Church of Christ at Dartmouth College. A special thanks to the one and only, the Reverend Rob Grable, who orchestrated everything at the church. And now, may the resilient, enduring Spirit of God be with each of you as we leave here today. May God's Spirit embolden and empower you. May it lift you up as this movement for justice rises and sweeps across the land. Take care of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for Patty and everyone who signed the petition. We appreciate it. Thanks again.